Hello, my name is Professor John Benjamin. This is West Virginia Wesleyan College, and this is Web Design. Today we'll be learning about Bootstrap. So as per usual, there are some helpful things in Canvas that you might want to open that up and take a look. First, let's talk about what is Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a framework or a website framework. It was developed by Mark Otto and Jacob Thornton at Twitter. And all Bootstrap is, and all website frameworks are, they're just a series of HTML5 templates and components, pre-written code, if you will, that use CSS and Java to create responsive web applications. So essentially, they've just done a lot of the work for us, and but the code is a lot of it's written for us. Some of the newer higher level frameworks are such as Skeleton and Simple Grid, but Bootstrap is still worldwide the most popular framework. Let's get started. So we're going to open up Dreamweaver, and we're going to create a new file. Now, for this particular tutorial, we're not going to put the t5.html in the labs folder. We're going to put it in the site folder. So if I select the site folder and say File, New File, and t5. All right, so we're not going to put this in the regular labs folder, and that's because we're doing Bootstrap, and it's going to generate some additional files, and it's going to want to put them outside here. And so just to keep things simple, let's just make sure we're on the top level. So this file will be on the same level as our index. All right, great. And then as usual, we just double click on a new file to open it. All right, and I'm in code split horizontal. You can be wherever you feel comfortable. All right, and so we're going to go ahead and add a Bootstrap component for the navbar. And let's go ahead, it's always a good habit to give your page a title. And so we're going to continue on with our design and marketing. All right, so put your cursor by body, and then we're going to go to the Insert menu. Now, before this, we've been using just the HTML set of inserts, but now we're going to go down to the Bootstrap components. All right, and if you scroll down, we've got a bunch of components here that we can just click on and add. And we want to add a navbar. And if we click on the little arrow, there are four options that we have. An inverted one, which is just dark background with light type. Fixed to bottom, a basic navbar, and then fixed to top. So we're going to select the fixed to top. All right, and there it is. And you can see what's already happened is a whole bunch of code has just been written for us, and there is our navbar. Now the first thing that we're going to need to do is save. So when we save, that's when Dreamweaver is going to incorporate those other components. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit File Save. And then you can see when we do that, Dreamweaver says this page uses an object or behavior that requires supporting files. The following files have been copied to your local site. And we're just going to say OK. So if you go to your Files tab, you should now see two additional folders that Bootstrap has added for you, or Dreamweaver. And if you open it up, there you can see the CSS folder with Bootstrap, and it's locked, so you don't want to make changes to it, even though you can unlock it if you want. So one of the things we can do is take a look at and see how this navbar actually operates. So we can come down here to our preview, and there you can see there's the fully opened navbar. But if I collapse my browser, it turns into a hamburger, or what's better known as a toggler, and that is for phones or tablets. But otherwise, then we have a drop-down menu, and all this is already all set for us. And so that's what we're looking at here. So if you only see the toggler, it just means that your screen isn't very wide. Like for instance, I can go ahead and make mine a little wider, and then I can see all of it. Okay, and so now the next thing that we need to do, even though Bootstrap has added its own CSS and Java, we're going to add our own CSS file. And what we're going to do there, it's going to be cascading, is we are going to only add cascading style sheets that we want to override the ones that have been pre-programmed for Bootstrap. So we're going to need to create our own, and needs to be above that one hierarchically. All right, cool. So how do we do that? The same way we always do. We're going to go to our CSS designer. And if you look here, you'll see there under sources is the Bootstrap one, read only. We're going to go ahead and add another one. So create a new one and browse. All right, and make sure we're in that same CSS folder, and we're just going to call it t5.css. And hit OK. And there you are. And so one of the things you always want to just be certain about is that your style sheet comes before Bootstrap? Well, in this case, it comes after. So hierarchically, it's going to read the Bootstrap one first, but then it's going to read yours next and override all of Bootstrap. So it should be in this order. Okay, so the next thing I want to point out to you is collapsing tags. So you can see we've got a whole bunch of code in here, and sometimes to make things look a little simpler, we just want to go ahead and collapse a group of tags. So like for instance here, if I put my cursor in the nav, you can scroll down and you can see the nav closing tag. So right here there's a little arrow on line 13, and if I click on that, it closes up everything in the nav bar. And so now I can just look, I don't really have anything else in here. There's just the body and some scripts. And do note that they did add the scripts, the JavaScripts, at the end. Remember, JavaScripts can take a little time to load, so it's good to have them to be the last thing that's read on your page. All right, so the next thing we want to do is remove some elements in this nav bar. So I'm going to go ahead and expand mine. So for this exercise, we don't need a search component or a search form, and we don't need a drop-down menu. So let's go ahead and just simply remove those. So this looks like a mess. It's really hard to really distinguish it. So we're going to try to navigate through here and see if we can find the things that we want to remove. So let's first talk about removing this search form. So let's take a look here, and then you can see the code in white for the word search, which is right there. So we can put our cursor down here and then take a look at the code that's around the word search. And what you'll see is the search is a form. It's a field that you can type in. So if I come up here to form, you can see the opening and closing tags. And that's where this whole area here that we want to get rid of is. This search, and the search button is all in here. You can see there's the button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to line 26 and collapse all that. If I select that whole bit, you can see that that's all selected there. All right, so now I can just hit delete. We can get rid of the whole thing. But I want to introduce you to another concept. It's called commenting. So I can comment this out, if you will. Now, the one way to do it is to select the whole thing, like so. And then if you come here, it says apply comment. And I can click there and I can say HTML comment. Now all that did was it simply added a angle bracket, exclamation, double dash, and then a closing double dash angle bracket. And if I open up line 26, you can see all that code is now grayed out. Now comments were originally just for that. So again, in web design, you're typically working in a team. And so you could leave little comments for your teammates in the code without disturbing the code. And that's what's happening here. But there's another great tool or way to use comments, and that's simply by, if you want to keep some code, but you would want to deactivate it, maybe you want to activate it later, then you can just go ahead and comment it out. And that's what we did. And so that's a little helpful. Like, hey, well, maybe I want to re-add that search form back in later. And so rather than delete it, I just comment it out. All right, so let's comment out a few other things. We're not going to need the drop-down. So let's go ahead and look for the word drop-down. Okay, that's where it is. And then let's take a look. And it looks like there's a list item with a drop-down right there. So if I put my cursor there, it'll light up its closing tag. And I can collapse line 19. And here I'm just going to go ahead and hand key my comment. And so again, it's simply angle bracket, exclamation point, double dash, and then closing, double dash, angle bracket. And there you go. And then you can see it's disappeared. All right, so now we just have a regular nav bar with 3 buttons. Okay, so we have here the word nav bar. And this is sort of the branding of the nav bar. Your logo or the name of your company could go right in there. And so let's go ahead and see how we change some properties in a Bootstrap component. All right, so first we have to find it. Now one of the ways you can do that is you can come kind of up here and click on it. And sometimes you can find where you're looking, sometimes maybe not so much. But there, if I double click, my cursor goes into navbar. You can see my cursor is now in the code up here with navbar. Now there's a lot of class. There's the class for the whole navbar. This nav class is a series here. But what I want is this navbar brand. You can see which is attached or before the word navbar. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put my cursor in there. And as usual, we're just going to go ahead now and create a selector. So we're going to make sure that we have our CSS selected, because we're going to add a CSS to ours, and it's going to override Bootstrap's. All right, so with that selected, I'm going to click New Selector. And you can leave in all of these other elements. It's really up to you. For this, that's what I would recommend. Or like we've learned before, you can delete a lot of these other ones and just leave .navbar brand. But for this case, let's just keep things simple and leave it all in there. Okay, so let's change a few things. First, maybe I'll change the text from navbar, coming right down here, to marketing and design by John. So maybe I'll just do like MND by John. All right. And now let's change the color of that and maybe the typography. So I'm going to come here and select my selector, and then down in properties. First I'll check type and color. So I'm going to change the color. I'm just going to use like a brick red. And there you can see it's changed. Now let's change the font family. I'm going to change it to Gill Sans. All right, and that's better. And I can also change some of the font styles. So for instance, maybe I like the font weight to change. I just like it to be bold, like that. All right, so it really pops out. And then you can see we've, right here in our style sheet, there's an asterisk because we've made changes to the styles. And so one of the things you can do is just get File and Save All. And we can go ahead and take a look and see what our style sheets look like right up here. Again, here's Bootstrap, so you shouldn't change, or it's locked, hopefully. And here's your JavaScript. But I can click on my T5 CSS. And there you have it. There is our selector, and here's the properties that I've added to it: Gill Sans and bold and color. And then you can just hand key a typeface right in here. Like I could simply change this to Helvetica and make that the only typeface. Okay, so let's say then I want the hamburger to be branded to my color red here. Okay, so how do I do that? So I can click on the toggler here, and then if I click, you can see there's kind of the outer part, which is the navbar toggler, and then the inner part, which is the navbar toggler icon. All right, and then again, that's going to take me into my code where I need to be. And so here's my navbar toggler icon. Now, I want to look at how Bootstrap has written the code so that way I can accurately override it. And the way to do this is on a PC or Command-E on a Mac. And so with my cursor there, it's going to take me to the navbar toggler icon in the Bootstrap CSS. All right, so I'm going to take a look here, and here it has some properties, but none of them are color. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, oh, okay, there's different styles associated with this icon. So I'm going to click here, and here I have the navbar light toggler icon. And there's also another option which we haven't chose. It's for the reverse navbar. But this is the one that we want, navbar light icon. And then I want to change the color. And so now I'm not going to do this in Bootstrap. Bootstrap should always be the same. What we're always going to do is override Bootstrap. And so what I want to do then is simply go ahead and highlight this code like that and hit copy. Then I'm going to come to my style sheet here. And right here, this is the closing and ending angle brackets. I'll go down one and hit paste. Okay, and so what I want to do is change the color of it. And so you have to know your color. In this case, it's not hexadecimal. It's just RGB and then a bit of transparency. So I'm just going to go ahead. I know the color that I want. It's 200 00 with a little 5 transparency. And then I'm going to go ahead and say File, Save All. And I can go back to my source code. And sometimes it takes a minute, but there it is, and now it's red. And I've changed that in my CSS to override the same code and same properties and selectors that are in Bootstrap because I changed the color right there. Okay, great. So again, just remembering that your CSS style sheet is just a bunch of code, it's just a bunch of handwritten text. And what we're doing over here is just sort of, Dreamweaver is helping us sort of write that code. All right, so that's how you can make changes to your navbar to make it do what you want. Oh, and you can click the little X there to close that up. All right, so let's add a little more structure to our page here. First, we're going to go to the Insert tab, and we're going to add containers. Now we have several different containers. We have a container, container fluid, and then a grid with columns. Grid with columns is much like an old HTML table, works in a similar way. Container fluid just stretches automatically to fit any width. And a regular container, we can just specify the width of it a little bit more. And there's just different reasons and different preferences for which one you want to use. But for starters here, we're going to go ahead and just create a container fluid. All right, and to do that, let's be sure we put it in the right place. So let's close up our nav bar, since that's got a lot of code, and we're going to put our cursor right below it and hit return, and then we're going to go ahead and hit container fluid. And there it is. Now you don't really see anything. It's right there because there's nothing in it. And here we have the div class container fluid and the closing div. So all our content is going to go right there before the closing div. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'll make it a header. So I'm going to just type in H1 and the full name of the company. I'm just going to put marketing and design by John. Okay. And then we should, sometimes it takes a moment, there it pops right in there. And that's our container. All right, so let's go ahead and create a 3-column grid. So what's a good practice to do is to create another fluid container and put the grid inside that container. But in this case, let's go ahead and just create a regular container. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert a container below container fluid header. And then inside that container, I'm going to put my cursor here. I'm going to go ahead and add a grid row with column. And in this case, I want to add 3, so I'm just going to hit OK. And there it gives me some little bit of placeholder text. And you can see, though, I have a container, and then I have grid rows, 1 row with 3 columns. Now, if you wanted an additional row, you could simply copy that, return and paste it, and then you've got 2 rows. But we just want 1 for now. So let's go ahead first, and we're going to add some lorem ipsum. Come down to your snippets, just double click. And you want your lorem ipsum to have a paragraph style, so I'm going to go back to Insert, HTML, and Paragraph. All right. And there, it's got some paragraph styles. That's quite a lot of lorem ipsum, so I'm going to go ahead and just delete some of it. That's a little bit more manageable. And now what I can do is I can, from my p tags, I can go ahead and copy that lorem ipsum and just paste it over the placeholder text that they gave us, like so. All right, so I've got 3 columns, and they are all in the row here. And what if I want to change the properties? Now, one of the things I can do is I can change the property of the entire row. So I can put my cursor there in row, come back to CSS Designer, and simply add container row. And maybe I just want to add a little padding at the top. So I can come down here to layout and add just padding at the top, maybe 20. Okay, and there we have a little padding on the top of our row. All right, and so now what if we wanted to make these columns, the color, be a little different, so be a little individual? So what we would do is we would add another class. So for instance, we would come here to column MD4, put a space bar, and I can just call this really anything I like, but I'll call it column 1. Right, and down here, I'm going to say column 2. And here, column 3. Okay, so I can put my cursor there, come over to my style sheets, add a new selector, column 1, and change the background color. There you have it. And then I can do the same thing. I can simply duplicate this and then just change the name to 2. And the same thing again to 3. And then I can simply change those properties if I want them to be a different color. So here I am on column 2. I'll make it a little lighter. And then column 3, and a little lighter. And there you can see that's how we can change the individual properties by giving a different class name. All right. Now, one thing we should point out about grid rows is they work in the 12-column grid. And so if we wanted to change, let's say, have a larger one and two smaller ones, what we would do is just break it up based on divided by 12, math divided by 12. So I could go here and I could change my first one, which is 4. There's 3 columns. That's 12 divided by 4 is 3. And so I can change that to, let's say, 6 and 3 and 3, which is all divisible by 12. And then you can see what we have here. We've got this one will collapse at 6, and then 3 and 3. And we can do different variations of this. I can go 8, 2, and 2, and that's how it all works on a 12-column grid. So you just do different. And now notice that we lost the properties, the background colors, and that's because we changed one of the class names. So to bring that back, I'm just going to change these back to 4, and they all come back. Great. All right, so we have a header and we have a body, so to speak. So let's go ahead and add a footer. So how do we do that? So make sure that you're at the end here. Like if we collapse these up, we want to make sure we're in the right place. So first we have this container, which is the header, and this container, which is the body. And after that, let's add an industrial container for the footer. So we'll say insert Bootstrap components container fluid. And then as per usual, we just add space and the word footer. And then that way it'll have its own class. And let's put some text in there. Just go ahead and say marketing and design by John, copyright 2020. And let's give that a style. I'm just going to give it a paragraph style. And let's add some properties to our footer. So put our cursor there and the 2 class names, go to CSS Designer and hit New Selector. And let's change some parameters. Let's add some padding. And a new background color. Now, if you choose a dark background color, then you're going to have to change the typeface to a lighter color. So in this case, I'm going to go to the text and change that color to something lighter, like so. All right, so there we have the beginnings of a website. We have a header, a body with 3 columns, and a footer. The 3 columns in that row in this central container. So I'm going to go and collapse that up, and I'm simply just going to delete them. There you go. So you should just have your header and your footer. All right, and so before your footer, right here, you're going to go ahead and insert a container, and then a second container below it. So we should have 2 containers. And then we're going to change the class name, or add to the class name, and we're going to change the first one to float left. And there's already a float left in there, in Bootstrap. And the same here with the next container, we're going to say float. All right, let's go ahead and add a little lorem ipsum in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and put in 2 paragraph tags and add lorem ipsum. Okay, I don't want that much. I'm going to go ahead and take out about half of it. And then I'm just going to copy and paste that bit there and put it in my float right. Okay. Now one of the things are looking a little goofy here, and that's because our footer needs to have its float removed. So let's come over to our footer and our designer here. In layout, we're going to scroll down to float. And we want to clear both left and right float. And that's going to make sure our footer goes to the bottom. So now that we've added these 2 classes, these 2 new classes, to these containers, our float left and float right, let's go ahead and add them to let's add those selectors. So I'm going to put my cursor in float left, add a new selector, and the same thing, float right, add a new selector. Now you can add the following properties right here, but what's even quicker, if you go to Canvas, and just scroll down to this section. I provided the parameters that I want you to enter, so you can simply copy and paste these. Go ahead and highlight, Command-C or Alt-C, or Control-C on a PC, and then come back to your code here, and then go to your CSS. And then you can scroll down to the bottom, and you see we've got our container left and right. So all you need to do is paste those parameters inside the curly brackets. So there's float left. I can come back here and say float right. We've got some colors there too. And paste that in there. And then just hit save. All right, so we come back to our source code. You can see all of those styles have been applied. So you could have gone in and entered them here in the properties panel, or in this case, you can just go and hand key them, or you just paste them in here. Now, if you want them to look like everything else, remember we just go to our Edit, Code, and Apply Source Formatting. And there they look the same. So now what we want to have happen here is, and when I collapse this, they're just going to get squeezed like so. So on a phone, that's going to get pretty hard to read. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is media queries. So in order to see the media query bars, you can go over here to toggle visual media query bar on and off. You can turn that on. And if we look here, there is the minimum and maximum widths that are already preset here. Now we want to add a media query, so we're going to hit the plus sign. And because I've selected 576, it's already going to say max width 576. Now it's going to ask you to create a new style CSS file, but you want to go ahead and link it to yours, just like so, and then hit OK. All right, and the next thing that we want to do is we want to create a duplicate style sheet for these two boxes here. So if we come over, we've got our left and right, our float left and float right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to say duplicate to media query. And here's my media query, 576 max width. All right, and then I'm going to come down to the left, pardon me, to the right, and I'm going to right click and say duplicate to media query 576. Now here, I've got duplicates now of those. So in order to see just the new ones, here in media, at media, I can select that. Now I only have two. And there are these properties which have been duplicated. So now what I want to have happen is, when the browser width is 576 or less, I want the width of each of these boxes to no longer be 33 and 77. I want them to be 100. So now I have the left one selected. I'm going to say 100%. All right, and then I'm going to select the right one, and I'm going to change that to 100%. Like so. All right, and then I'm going to hit File, Save All. And then when I get down here to 576, boom, it stacks. So now it doesn't collapse and it's no longer unreadable like it was before. And you can test this out too in your preview. Here it is, and there it is collapsed. Ready for phone. So that's called responsive web design, and that's how media queries work. And again, what they do is they just simply analyze the width of your screen and then change it accordingly. So now let's take a look in our CSS just to see what's really happened here. If we scroll down to the bottom, here is our at media query, and here is the width when these things are going to change. And again, all we did is simply duplicate container float left and float right. So here's the regular, or the original, 33% and 67%. Under the media query, 100%. And that's what we've done. And that's the end of this exercise. So good luck with your homework assignment.